this to me is like the really fascinating material.
We don't know what the answer is, but we're looking for patterns.
I think we're looking at kind of a type of cosmic alchemy.
The story slowly
But still, a lot of people don't know that this technology actually exists.
The possibilities here are pretty mind-boggling.
A secret passageway with a secret church that is Are these places of power because there is an ancient site there, or were these ancient sites built on places of power?
We're getting into bizarre areas of relationships that you really have to invest the time to start peeling back the onion.
Do you remember the goat?
I don't remember the goat. No.
No, I think that.
These secret societies, is there a knowledge they are preserving about some of these
What you had there was the detonation of a 15 megaton cosmic missile.
Bring me a cookie.
All this heavy talk is making me hungry. I can't wait for the pizza anymore.
Actually, I was gonna get into this, but there's a movie called Highway of Tears, Texas Highway of Tears.
There is, yeah, and I
Yeah.
still haven't gotten around to watching it. There's one about the alphabet murders too, but I haven't watched that either, even though that is on Shudder also, but I will get around to watching that.
Right.
I watched clips of it before because we did an episode about it, and I watched clips of it, and I was like, that doesn't really look very good, but eventually
Yeah, I watched the Texas Highway of Tears one today, and I mean, it was okay. I'd probably give it like a C. It's actually directed by the daughter of Michael Mann.
Get out.
Yeah. So, and it has Jeffrey Dean Morgan, of course, you know, it's Negan.
Yeah.
Sam Worthington. So, and like Chloe Grace Moretz. And
Wow.
there's a lot of like good people in it, but it's kind of like a good like first effort for her, you know. There's some like kind of, but she does a lot of like copying her dad's kind of style.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things in it that kind of reminded me a little bit about like Manhunter.
Oh, okay, yeah. I need to rewatch that. I want to do an episode on that because I remember liking that movie a lot.
Yeah. Have you ever seen that, Sergio?
No.
You ever seen Manhunter?
No.
Okay, so Manhunter is the first Hannibal Lecter movie.
No shit.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have Anthony Hopkins. It's I can't think of his name now.
Yeah, what's that dude's name? I can't remember that actor.
So he was in X-Men 2, and he like Rushmore and all these other movies. But it's got the guy that was in Monster Squad and all like the big tall guy. That's a great actor. And
yeah.
he plays the killer, but it was later remade into Red Dragon.
Yeah, because it was based on the book Red Dragon, but they called it Manhunter for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Then when they remade it later, they called it Red Dragon.
It's like William Peterson, the guy who later went on to CSI. Like, it's a great movie, but it's really 80s.
It says FBI criminal profiler Will Graham, played by William L. Peterson, is called out of early retirement to assist a serial murder case involving a killer known as the Tooth Fairy, Tom Noonan.
Tom Noonan, yep.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, and
that guy, I think.
yeah. So we're here to talk about the 1970s in your book, The Faceless Villain.
That's right.
This is going to be for episode 234, but I'm going to make this your 4.5 episode for you, Jenny.
Okay. Because you still only got through like half of the 70s.
Well, this will be a good teaser because I think there's some things we're going to talk about here that are not that go on through the 70s, kind of start in the beginning of the 70s and then go through the 70s and then on into the 80s.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, one of the cases we're going to talk about tonight, the Lady of the Dunes. Well, let's talk about that one first, actually, because this is kind of topical because one of the suspected killers actually died today as we're recording this.
That's right.
Yeah, Whitey Bulger.
Bulger?
Yep.
Wow.
That's right. Yeah, he was the main. He's kind of the main prime suspect, or kind of the one they talk about all the time. Yeah, he died today.
They said that he was killed in prison.
Yep.
So what is this story with the Lady of the Dunes?
Yeah, this actually happened. This was in 1974. Matter of fact, it was in the summer, and it happened in Massachusetts. And so it's late July 1974, and there's this little girl. She's 13 years old. She's out looking for her dog. They have a house on Cape Cod, and her dog ran off. So she's out looking for the dog, and she hears the dog barking. And so she finds the dog, and the dog has found a body. And this is this horribly decomposed body. This is a naked woman. She's lying on a blanket, like just kind of tucked away off of the side of the beach, off of the path. And she had like her jeans and bandana, which I presume she had been wearing, and they'd kind of been balled up and stuffed under her head. They think that probably she either knew the killer or was attacked while she was sleeping, because she didn't seem to have struggled or anything like that. It looked like she had been killed by maybe they said like a military entrenching tool, like that someone had taken it and like bashed in the side of her head. Also, whoever killed her had removed her teeth, both of her hands and one of her forearms. So they're thinking that probably that was because they wanted to, forestall identification, perhaps. Maybe she was some kind of person that would have identified the killer if they knew who the victim was. So all they knew about her, they just called her the Lady of the Dunes. They didn't know what her identity was. So they're like, she's about 5'6", about 145 pounds. It's like she's got reddish hair tied back in a ponytail, maybe between 25 and 40 years old. They said, but she could be as old as 49. They're not really sure. They thought that they'd be able to identify her pretty quickly because she had like some really distinctive dental work that would have cost a lot of money. But, they checked dental records all around the area and didn't really find anything. So, eventually they had to give her an anonymous burial. No one came forward to identify her. But like you said, the main suspect in her murder was James Bulger, known as Whitey Bulger, who's better known as. He had actually been in prison since 2013, I believe. He was convicted of not necessarily murder, but complicity, like in 11 murders. And a bunch of racketeering charges as well. The reason they thought it was him was because there was a club nearby, and allegedly he had worked as a hustler, like a gay hustler out of this particular club. And this club had these types of green towels, and it was very similar to the type of towel that had been found underneath the body of the Lady of the Dunes. Also, he had the same size shoes as footprints found around the body. And also, he was kind of a gangster, so he often would remove people's teeth, to keep them from being identified. So they thought maybe it was him. But like I said, he died in prison. He was in Florida prison, I believe, Sumterville, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, he was down there in, he's in federal prison. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, he'd been there since 2013. And so, like you said, he died today. But he was kind of the prime suspect. I think the only other suspect they had in the crime was a guy named Hadden Clark, I think was his name. He's also in prison, as last time I checked. That's in Maryland. He killed two people that they know of, a 6-year-old girl named Michelle Dorr and a 23-year-old woman named Laura Hotelling. And he, in 2004, he actually told police, he confessed that he had killed the Lady of the Dunes, but he wouldn't tell them who she was. And evidently they asked him about it, and he drew a map that corresponded pretty closely to where the body had been found. And he drew the little body on there, and it didn't have any hands, which they thought was kind of interesting because she was found without hands. But the thing about it was that he had some mental health issues. He'd been diagnosed as paranoid schizophrenic. So they weren't, the police weren't really sure how seriously to take the confession, even though he had been convicted of 2 murders. He said that there was this garden like behind, I think it was his grandfather's house. And he said, oh, I buried all this stuff back there and it will, kind of give you some evidence or whatever. So they go and they dig it up at last. And they found a bunch of stuff back there. It was mostly like jewelry and things like that. They didn't find anything that they could link to the Lady of the Dunes, specifically, but they did find a ring, I think, that belonged to one of the victims that they knew that he killed. So they're like, well, maybe this is his like little, burying spot where he buries all the trophies and everything like that. So it's possible that, he could have been the killer as well. But, I don't know how they're going on that front. And then one kind of interesting thing about this, and I put this in my book, but in 2015, Joe Hill, who is a horror writer, very famously, he's the son of Stephen King, he said that he was watching the movie Jaws, and one of the extras in the background looked exactly like the facial reconstruction of the unidentified Lady of the Dunes. And he said, and she was wearing Wrangler jeans and a blue bandana, just like the ones that had been found with the body. Now, they said this particular scene had been filmed about 100 miles, like away from where the body was eventually found. But like I said, it seems like the cops are like, yeah, whatever. But I think it's kind of interesting that he swears, Joe Hill swears that he saw the person that was the Lady in the Dunes in the background of this film. And it's like so he's like hoping that they'll find out her identity, like from like, trying to find out who the extras on the movie were and stuff like that. But I don't know I don't know how deeply they've looked into that, but he insists that that's the same woman.
Yeah. Like I think he was trying to see if he could find like a list that would show all the extras, or like, cause they have to pay them. So they have to pay extras, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So she would have been on a list somewhere, and there were a lot of them because it was a big crowd scene. But I think it was one of the big crowd scenes that was on the beach, like when the shark first attacked or whatever. But so I don't think they ever pulled any. As far as I know, they still don't know who this woman is.
Yeah, that is fascinating that he could have that much attention to detail to even see that. Well, I think what it was that he saw like a new Blu-ray version where things were like much clearer in the movie, that you really couldn't see individual people in the crowd before. And I think because of that, he was able to see it and notice it.
Maybe so. It's like he must be better at identifying faces than me, because it's like I don't usually even pay attention to people in the background.
Right.
So like I would never even notice like if that happened. I could be seeing unidentified murder victims in the background of movies all the time and not even know about it, which is kind of sad.
Well, do you that would be kind of scary too. Like that would be kind of
that's super creepy. I'm sure it's happened.
Oh yeah. Was he interested in the case before that? I guess he would have had to have been.
Yeah, because it seemed like he immediately recognized. I mean, they did release new facial reconstructions. They do it like every few years, if we get more like accurate ones and stuff like that. So maybe he had just happened to see one. It's like I don't know how recently he had seen a reconstruction of her face, that he would have just happened to be watching Jaws and be like, hey, that's the same woman. You know what I mean? And maybe his mind just recently saw the reconstruction and just kind of molded it onto somebody that was in the background. Because you'd think if he saw it years and years ago that he wouldn't make the connection. But,
Here's another one that's similar to the Lady of the Dunes. This is Little Miss Lake Panas.
Yeah. This is a Florida one.
Yeah.
The unidentified victim ones, those are always kind of like creepy, because who are these people? Like, did they just like slip in from another dimension? And it's just so weird to me how people, I guess it was more common, I guess, in the 60s and 70s, people not being identified. People ran away from home and they were hitchhiking, maybe their parents were dead or their parents didn't know where they were or something like that. It seems like nowadays, I guess it still happens now, but it seems like it'd be a lot less likely that you could just disappear off the face of the earth and, and turn up dead and no one would know who you were. But yeah, this actually happened in Sumter County, Florida, Central Florida, which is not that far from us. And it happened in February 1971. And actually, there were 2 teenage kids, and they were walking across a bridge. And they happened to look down into the water, and they saw a decomposed body of a woman. So the police come and they fish her out. She's obviously been strangled because there's still a man's belt around her neck. They found her. She was still dressed. She wasn't naked. They found her. She was wearing a green shirt, green plaid pants, and a shawl. She didn't have any ID or anything like that, but she still had jewelry and things like that. She had a ring on her hand that might have been a wedding ring. They're not really sure. So she was pretty young. They think she was between 17 and 24, pretty small. They think she had at least 1 kid, maybe 2. At first, they thought she was either Native American or white. They couldn't really determine what her race was. She had really long, straight, dark hair. Again, had extensive dental work, so they were hoping that they would be able to find out who she was. But again, no matches in the, when they searched the dental records around the area. They also thought that she had a bunch of broken ribs when they found her, so they think that whoever strangled her had probably knelt on her while they were doing it. Like they just knelt on her chest and then like pulled the belt around her neck. So they called her Little Miss Lake Panisofsky because obviously that's the lake where she was found. They don't know where she was murdered. She was obviously just dumped off the bridge and into the lake, at some point after she was murdered. They put it on Unsolved Mysteries in the 90s, but that didn't really bring any leads or anything like that. Now, when they actually did later on, they were able to do, because nowadays they can do that thing like with the fluoridation in the teeth and like all the DNA and everything. So they can pretty much pinpoint exactly where the person was born or where they grew up or whatever. So in 2012, they actually did a really extensive, re-examination of the body. And they were able to determine that she actually came from this really small fishing port in Greece. And that she had only been in the U.S. Less than a year, like before she was murdered. So now that they know, well, this is where she came from. So then they started, there's a lot of Greek people that live in Tarpon Springs in Florida. So they kind of like targeted that community. It's like, who is this? Does anybody know her? And also they made like a true crime show in the Greek language that they showed in Greece, so they could get some leads there. And actually this woman did come forward and said that she had gone to school with a girl named Constantina. And she said, we went to this school where they teach you to be like, nannies or domestic servants or whatever, like with a view to going and working overseas, like in other countries. She's like, so this particular woman who knew her was like, I didn't know her super well, but, we kind of chummed around in school and stuff. She's like, and then when we graduated, I went off to work in Australia and she went off to work in the US. So they're thinking that possibly this girl is named Constantina. Now, none of her family has come forward or anything like that, but it seems like the timeline matches up, like when she came to the United States and, her movements after she got here. So they think that maybe this is her. But like I said, they don't know her last name. I don't think the witness knew her last name or anything like that. She just knew her. She was like a school friend. So they're kind of hoping that eventually they'll be able to identify her and they'll find out who killed her, if it was just like a random murder, if it was, some kind of crime of passion or something like that. But yeah, so that was that one. And like I said, still not identified, but it seems like they're getting closer to it, especially since they pinpointed exactly where she came from.
That's pretty amazing. Like that's mostly through like DNA study, I would guess.
Yeah, it's really creepy because now it's like I'll read some of them and they'll be like, from the DNA, they determined that this person had, grown up in this area, but then moved before they were a teenager because of like particular stuff, like isotopes that are in the water in particular parts of the world, particular plants, or pollen or things like that are in different parts of the world. So they can tell like pretty much exactly like where people go nowadays. And it's like, pretty creepy. Well, again, I don't know. It's creepy, but in a way, it's kind of cool because
that's the Illuminati tracking system.
Yeah, I guess it is.
Wasn't there another one in? I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Was there one in the book? I think that I read in from 1970 to 74. That was a body with just no head.
Yeah, well,
or were there several of those?
There were several of those. I think there was one. Oh shoot. I think there was one in the UK. I remember one in the UK, in Norfolk.
Okay,
I think
that's it.
The Norfolk
That's it.
headless body. Yeah. I don't remember like a lot of the details, the super thing, but yeah, I remember them finding that. And I remember it had some kind of, didn't it? I think the body was like wrapped in this plastic that had like a logo on it that was from some company in Scotland or something.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and then like she was wearing like a nightgown that was from Marks and Spencer, like a peach colored or pink colored nightgown or something. But yeah, she was another one that they never identified. And it's like they never found the head or anything. It's like, ugh, what the hell?
Yeah.
Where is that head? Did they eat it? Did they boil? It's like, where is it? It's just that freaks me out.
That makes it a lot harder to identify. Of course, in the lake Panas, I cannot say this, Lake Panaskovsky or whatever.
Yeah.
They were completely wrong about her like origin when just by looking at her they thought she was Native American. So that completely took them in the wrong direction.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they weren't really sure of her race at the beginning. They said, well, she could be white, she could be Native American. But then when they did the DNA, she's like, oh, she's not even. She's European.
But that was
specifically Greek.
Almost 40 years later, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So it just goes to show, like back in the day, and I write about a lot of cases too, where they're just kind of like, well, we didn't see the person do it. It's like fingerprints. That's about it. That's about all they had, was fingerprints and blood type. They didn't have DNA. So unless somebody saw you, you kind of got away with stuff.
Two that were associated that I thought were particularly interesting was Dolores Della Penna,
yeah,
and Jeanette De Palma.
Yeah, these two are pretty weird. It's like, I don't know, because it seems like
wasn't this Florida too? Or no, this is something else.
This is New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah, this was New Jersey. Actually, the first Dolores Della Penna was Philadelphia.
Sorry to think everything's in Florida.
Yeah. It's weird because I was thinking about this the other day when I was going through, because I've been working on the audiobook version of this book. It's taking forever. Holy crap. But, because I'm having so many technical difficulties. But I was like, how few of these crimes happened in Florida? And I was like, well, what happened to Florida lately that's just all of a sudden, Florida man, and like all the crazy stuff happens here? But it's like before that, it seemed like most of the crimes, and I think I probably mentioned this on the last one that we did about the 60s, was like a bunch of them were in Iowa for some reason. I don't really know why.
Yeah. It was like Iowa and London, Ontario were most of the cases.
And California. There were a lot in California. Yeah. But that was like a handful of killers that did a whole bunch of them.
Something in the water.
I don't know what it is.
Did you ever see that van driving around, Jenny?
Huh?
Did you ever see that van that was in the news? Did you ever see that driving around in Orlando?
Oh shit!
You sound like you're talking through a comb with toilet paper across it.
Oh, sorry. No, that van that bomber, the suspected bomber, was driving.
No, I didn't see it.
Okay.
He had a lot of opinions.
But yeah, these two, I don't know, like they seem kind of weird because they both seem a little bit ritualistic, but I don't know if they're necessarily related. The first one, like I said, this happened, in Philadelphia. Dolores Della Penna, she was 17, and she went to a Catholic high school. Although I think she had just graduated. And she had actually, maybe the reason why you thought it was Florida was because right before she was killed, she got back from Florida. Like she'd been on vacation in Florida. And then she came back home to Philadelphia and got murdered. And this happened in July of 1972. Now, the weird thing is that she's in her neighborhood of Philadelphia, which is called Kensington. And a bunch of witnesses later said, oh, well, we saw some people dragging her into a car, and it looked like she was unconscious, but I don't know if nobody called the cops or nobody was alarmed about that. Maybe they just thought she was drunk or sick or something like that, and they didn't really think anything of it. But a couple people did see like somebody dragging her into a car. And then later on, in Jackson Township, this family shows up at their vacation cabin, and their dog comes, trotting out of the backyard, and he's got a woman's arm hanging out of his mouth. Like, hey, look what I found, you guys. And the family's just horrified.
Oh my God.
So then they're like looking around, like, where did he get that from? And so they're like looking around in the yard, and then they find part of a torso. And it didn't have any organs in it, as though someone had taken all the organs out. Also, the arm that they found, like the finger sort of came off. So obviously someone was trying to, keep her from being identified. And then in the New Jersey Pine Barrens, which were about 8 miles from where the rest of the body was found, this other guy found a pair of legs. So they put all this body together. They never found her head, but they did determine that it was Dolores Della Penna, who had disappeared in July of 1972. Now, they think what probably happened to her was that there were rumors that her and her boyfriend were used drugs or had stolen money or drugs from a gang of drug dealers, like a bunch of bikers. That was the most persistent rumor at the time. And there were also allegedly this gang had dragged her to this warehouse in the Kensington neighborhood, had tortured her. Some sources say gang raped her also, and then had beheaded her with a machete, and then dumped her body in various parts. This was supposedly a revenge murder for stealing drugs or money from this particular biker gang, who were drug dealers. So the person that confessed to all this, who I think was only a teenager at the time, said, yeah, I was totally there. Like, I was in the warehouse when they brought her in and I saw her get beheaded. But by the time he named a few of the other suspects, but most of the ones he named were already dead. So they couldn't really do all that much about it. Evidently, there wasn't really that much physical evidence remaining after all that. But the creepy thing about this was that a little while after the murder, somebody left like a clay bust, like of a woman's head, in this construction area in New York, like by a library.
What in the world?
Yeah, and they don't know if it's related, but the weird thing was that it had like a inscription, like on the back of the statue, like on the back of the statue's head, that said, "My wife forever, Della Penna."
Uh-huh.
So they don't know if this, but the statue, the face of the statue, like wasn't a 17-year-old girl. It was like a middle-aged woman. So they don't know if that just happened to be, if it was someone named Della Penna, or if it had anything to do with the Dolores Della Penna case. It just seemed kind of odd that this statue just kind of randomly turned up there. They said it looked like it had been made pretty recently, like someone made it specifically like to leave there. So they thought that was a little odd, but they could never determine like whether it had anything to do with the murder or not. So then, yeah, it was really weird. So then there was another one. It was like a little more than a month later, a little less than a month later, actually. Now, since, like I said, Dolores Della Penna was actually probably killed in Philadelphia, but a lot of her body was found in New Jersey. But so there was this other one, and this also took place in New Jersey. And this girl was named Jeanette De Palma, and she was 16. She was a high school student. And she just left her house one night. She was going to a friend's house or something like that. It was August, beginning of August, 1972. She gets on the train and disappears. So, she never gets to her friend's house. She never comes home. So her parents report her missing, but they don't find her for 6 weeks. Now, the weird thing about this story, and it was really hard to get kind of the straight dope about this story, because the Jeanette De Palma case has taken on so much folklore in the years since it happened that I wasn't real sure. Like, and when I wrote about it in the book, I was kind of like, well, I'm going to say, you know, what some of the sources said, but I don't know if I necessarily believe like how all this went down. But apparently, Jeanette De Palma was found dead. Now, the same thing happened in her case where she was found after a dog carried the arm like to somebody that was nearby, which I thought was kind of weird. I'm like,
Yeah.
These dogs finding, but I said it had to be specifically an arm, I guess, because that's the easiest thing to pick up. So the dog just comes running out with an arm. It's like, hey, I found another. It was a different dog though. So yeah, it's like that was the weirdest thing. I'm like, of all the random things to happen. So they find her on top of this hill, and it's this quarry, and I guess it's called the Devil's Teeth. I'm not really sure why the quarry is called that. I guess presumably because it's like, you know, has jagged rocks or something at the top. They actually couldn't figure out what the cause of death was. She didn't have any drugs or alcohol in her system. There was no obvious signs. She hadn't been beaten or shot or stabbed or anything like that. It's possible she could have been strangled, but they weren't really sure. So they just, you know, on her death certificate, it actually says unknown. So they're not super sure if it's a homicide, but they're guessing it probably is. They just don't know how she was killed. They said one thing that was very weird when they did the postmortem, they said in her body, they found a really high proportion of lead, which was very strange. So I don't know if that indicates maybe some kind of poisoning or something of that nature. Now, a lot of the stories about Jeanette De Palma say that when she was found, that she was laid out like in a ritualistic fashion. Like somebody had put her body like in the middle of this, like they had taken like logs or sticks or something and made like a coffin shape around her. Some sources also say that there were all these little like crosses made out of sticks, like kind of put around the coffin, that there were trees around the clearing that had like arrows carved on them that were like pointing toward the body, you know, and stuff like that. And some sources even go in so far and say, oh, there was like all these occult kind of things around the body, or there was like dead animals, like people had sacrificed them and stuff. So like I said, I'm not sure how much of that is, you know, exaggeration. Pretty much most of the real sober stuff did say about the coffin thing and the sticks thing. I'm not sure about the dead animals and all the other like satanic kind of stuff around there. But
Yeah.
That's a pretty common part of the story. But it seemed like there was a friend of the family that was a reverend, and he said, oh, you should look into an occult thing and, you know, all this other stuff, even though some people think he might have been the one that killed her. So I'm not really sure. But you know what I mean? So at this stage, really, I don't think, other than this homeless guy that kind of lived in the woods that they arrested and kind of questioned for a little while, and then they let him go, they really had no clue who had done this. And, you know, over the years, I think the legend has grown that it was like a satanic cult and they sacrificed her for whatever reason and then left her on top of this quarry, which, like I said, is called the Devil's Teeth. So maybe it had some kind of occult significance, but, you know, who knows? And like I said, there's a lot about it in Weird New Jersey, Mark Moran. I think they do a magazine, and I think they did a book also, as far as I know, because I got some of the information out of there. But he's real interested in the case, so he wrote a lot about it.
Yeah, this is the time period where like the Satanic Panic is getting started.
Yep.
It's around that time, like after Rosemary's Baby and The Exorcist movies, that kind of that whole thing kind of gets started. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I love that topic. Like, still, even though we've been doing, you know, our podcast for more than 2 years, our second episode that we did about the Satanic Panic is still one of my favorite episodes.
Oh yeah, you guys did a really good job on that. That was awesome.
I'm just so fascinated by that time period. It's like I want to do a revisit because there was so much that I left out that I kind of wanted to get into. You know, now that we do like the longer format, I feel like I could probably get more into it and go more into, you know, more into detail about some of the cases and stuff. So I'm really like pretty much any case that I read, because there were a few in the book, any case where it's like, oh, it was an occult or it was a cult sacrifice, I'm always really, really leery of that type of thing.
Yeah.
It really does. There's a couple where I'm just kind of like, oh, maybe, you know what I mean? Just because they were so weird. But generally, I think that that's not usually the case. But, you know, it does happen. I just think it's like a much smaller percentage than people might think.
There was a couple that was in the chapter in 1969. Of course, this is out of kind of our purview, but there was 2 murders of women that had to do with like Babylonian stuff or something that was weird.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it was like some kind of like weird funerary practices, like with the red ochre and stuff like that. Yeah, and like the carpets over the face and stuff. I was kind of thinking maybe just because she was a student and she studied that kind of thing, I was thinking maybe that had contributed to her death. But like I said, I think it's really unusual if it does happen. I'm not saying it never happens. I just think it's pretty unusual.
Yeah.
Seems like something that people like to embellish anything with. Me and Adam been seeing a lot of the revisit of a lot of those Satanic Panic ideas, and like
it's still very much around
in the current conspiracy culture. It's really like had this resurgence, but
yeah, it really does. It really does seem. Yeah, I'm just so skeptical of like conspiracy theories in general. Small conspiracies, I can buy that if it's only like a few people, okay. But it's like once you're getting to these big global conspiracies, like, you know, there's a huge cabal of like people like all over the world. I'm just like, that would not work, because I know how humans are. It's like someone would blab. It's like someone would find out about it. It's just like it's too big to keep it a secret. You know what I mean?
There's probably like 20 cabals going at it. Pretty much. Right. That's what I think.
That's what I mean. It's like, I'm not saying there's not cabals, but they're small.
Yeah.
If they exist, I don't think there's like big, like globe spanning ones.
Sacrificing thousands of babies every year. You don't think so?
Yeah. That was the one thing about the Satanic Panic stuff that didn't quite add up, was when they were talking about all the baby, like the they would get the girls pregnant and they would have the babies to sacrifice, and the FBI later came in and they did investigate, and they said, well, where are all these graves, like, you know, from all this testimony. And there's other things that have been proven of just how a lot of it was fake, that these kids were our kids were being like encouraged to make stuff up and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, especially like the McMartin preschool case and stuff like that. I mean, some of these people went to prison. I mean, because of these like little kids, these outlandish stories that couldn't possibly be true. But, you know, it just like ruined people's lives. Ridiculous.
Right. Let's talk about a couple of family murders. So we have the Peak family and the Diggs family. And you've got a few of these stories in the book of murders of entire families.
Yeah, those freaked me out. And we did actually one of our 100th episode, we did several family massacres, and those were like, for some reason they're really fascinating to me, but they're also like super, super depressing, because I'm like, what kind of person, like, it's terrible enough to just like, just stab a random woman on the street, but to like calculatingly like go inside a house and kill, mom, dad, kids, sometimes dog. It's like, what kind of
the dog, the cat,
like, well, when like the Bowles family, like when they were murdered up at their cabin, it's like they killed, the mom, the dad, their 2 boys, and their dog. It's like they don't even know why. It's like somebody just walked in and shot them all. Just no reason. Not that they know of anyway. Ooh. But it's just scary. It's like, some just like really, really frightening. But let's talk about the Peak family.
Cool.
They actually, this happened in Nebraska. So again, Midwest. This happened, I think, in 1972 in September. Now, interestingly, Bill Peak, who was the patriarch of the family, he was a retired Army colonel, and he had previously been a military attaché to Hungary and to Russia. So I'm not sure if that had anything to do with his murder, but I don't know. But he was retired. He had a wife named Bernice, and they had a teenage daughter, Barbara. She was 14, and they decided to move to Nebraska, and they were going to buy, like, Bernice's family owned a branch, like a chain of grocery stores called Allen's Grocery Store. So they decided they were going to buy a franchise, and they were going to open a store up in Grand Island, Nebraska. So they bought the land, and they hadn't started building the store yet, but they were going to go get all the permits. Now, 2 days before they were supposed to go get the permits, Bill's dad, or Bernice's dad, comes over to the house, like, to watch the game on TV or whatever, and he comes in the house, and all three of the family members are dead. They've all been shot with a .22 caliber gun. So so the dad and the teenage daughter are both dead. Bernice was still alive. She got shot in the face. Now, they took her to the hospital. She died 2 months later, but all she had been able to tell the police was that there was more than one killer. It was multiple assailants. So they know that probably this was not robbery. They did find the dad, Bill, his wallet was found outside the house, but all the credit cards were still in it. They didn't know if there was any cash in it that had been taken, but nobody took his credit cards. Nobody went through their house. It wasn't ransacked or anything like that. And the mom and the daughter hadn't been raped. So obviously somebody just walked in and shot them all. And they think that whoever walked in, they said it was probably someone they knew, because where the bodies were found, they said Bill had, like, a cigarette and, like, a lighter, like, underneath him, like he'd just been sitting there lighting up a cigarette when this person or people just walked in and started shooting at them. So they don't know if it was someone they knew or if it was just some people that they didn't have any reason to fear, because these people just came in and started shooting, and nobody seemed to have struggled or moved or anything like that. So, they're not sure really what, they couldn't find any evidence of any kind of, there was no mob involvement. There didn't seem to be any drug, anything with drugs going on or anything like that. For a while, they even thought maybe it was a murder-suicide, like maybe Bill had killed them and then killed himself, but they couldn't really establish that that was the case. And the family was like, no, he would have never done that. And I don't think, the way he was shot, it didn't really look very likely that he could have shot himself anyway. But, as far as I know, they have some family members that are still kind of looking into it and still trying to keep the case alive and everything like that. But they really don't have much idea either. Some of them think maybe it was some stalker that was after the teenage girl for whatever reason, or, maybe I think the Peaks had an older daughter that was away at college or lived, away from them. Maybe it was some of her friends, for whatever reason, although that seemed like hippie hate. What those long-haired freaks that the older daughter hung out with, maybe it was some of them. So that seemed a little bit like that. So I don't know why there would be any reason for anybody to just come in and shoot the whole family like that. But yeah, so that was another one. And like I said, that happened in Nebraska. Again, not Florida.
him being political, though, at that time with those countries, that's, and the, assassination style squad with 22s. It sounds pretty, to the conspiracists, that's like, whoa, something was going on.
Yeah. And I kind of feel like maybe, the only thing I can think of is maybe the dad had done something to piss someone off at some point, or maybe he knew something that he wasn't supposed to know. particularly, concerning his military career or something like that. That kind of stuff does happen. So, yeah. And I can't really think of any better reason why anyone would just come in and start blowing them all away. So, maybe I'm assuming that they looked into that and didn't really find anything or couldn't find anything along that line. So who knows?
And the Diggs family was the other one.
Yeah, the Diggs family. This also happened in New Jersey. We're all doing Midwest and New Jersey today. The Diggs were actually they were a black family, and this was in 1975. They had just moved to Teaneck, New Jersey. They had previously lived in New York City. They moved into a pretty much all-white neighborhood. It didn't seem like anybody was not cool with it. From all accounts, their neighbors liked them. They were very well respected. The dad, who was Wesley Diggs, he actually owned 4 bars in Manhattan and various other locations. The most popular one was called Diggs Den, and it was in Harlem. And they had actually bought a house out in Teaneck because they kind of wanted to get away from, the rat race in New York and everything. So Wesley is he's commuting back and forth to New York City. He works a lot. Like I said, he has 4 bars, so he's kind of going back and forth and managing all of them. His wife sells Avon. They also had 4 kids. Some of them were grown or teenagers. They had a daughter named Audrey, who was 19. They had one named Allison, who was 16. Wesley Jr. was 12, and Roger was 5. Now, this happened in December of 1975, and Wesley Diggs, the dad, he comes home from work, and it's fairly early in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock. And so he comes in the house, and it's really, really quiet, and he thinks that's really weird. So he goes into his daughter Audrey's room, which was the closest to the front door, and he sees her lying on her bedroom floor, and she has obviously been shot in the head. There's just a huge pool of blood. So he runs next door to his neighbor's house, because one of his neighbors was a nurse, and he said, Audrey's hurt, please call the police and, call the ambulance and everything like that. So they all come back over to the house, to help him out. And then they find the rest of the family. So Allison, who is the 16-year-old, she was in her bedroom in the attic, and she'd also been shot twice in the head. Same gun. It was also a .22 caliber automatic pistol. Roger, who was the 5-year-old, and Wesley Jr., they actually shared a room. They'd also been shot multiple times. And then they found Wesley's wife, Jean. She was down in the basement. They had a rec room down there. She'd been shot in the head and the chest. Again, no ransacking of the house, so no robbery. No one had broken in, so whoever it was had either the door had been unlocked, or they had been let in, or they knew them. It seemed like no one had struggled or tried to run away, so it just seemed like whoever it was had just come in and just started shooting the people wherever they were, because they were all just sitting in their bedrooms. So the first thing that the authorities thought was, well, maybe the dad, Wesley Diggs, maybe he hired somebody to kill his family for whatever reason. So they kind of put him through the ringer, gave him polygraph tests and everything like that. They determined that, he didn't seem like he was lying. He seemed like he really didn't know anything about it, and he was super really upset. So they were like, well, they probably imagined that it wasn't him. And he even actually wanted to get the FBI involved, although I don't know how involved they got. But the next kind of avenue that they pursued was, well, maybe it has something to do with some kind of shady dealings at, one of the taverns that Wesley owns. There had been kind of a couple other murders that had sort of happened, tangentially to the taverns that he had. There was one that happened on December 10th, I think, which was, only 5 days after the Diggs family was killed. It was this heroin dealer got murdered. It didn't really have anything to do with Wesley Diggs's bars per se, but it happened really nearby. It happened in a bar nearby. And also there was another guy named Daryl Skullark, I think is how you pronounce his name. And he'd actually been killed. He'd been kicked out of one of Wesley's taverns, the Diggs Den in Harlem, not long before it happened. But then he went to the Apollo Theater in Harlem, and he got shot dead on the same day as the family was murdered. So they didn't know if there was some kind of relation there. Maybe he did it and then ran off, or then maybe the same person did it. So, other than that, they don't really know. They're like, yeah, it could have been a mob hit. It could have been a racial thing. They said it did happen sometimes that particularly black families that lived in kind of upper middle class white neighborhoods, sometimes people would get resentful about that. There were a couple other cases in the book where that was actually the case.
Yeah.
Somebody came and just kind of assassinated them because they were jealous or because they didn't want them living there for whatever reason. So they're like, that could have been a factor as well. Sad thing is they never did find out who killed the family, and the dad actually died many years ago in 1987, and he never got to know who killed all his entire family. So that's a bummer.
Dealing with the decades that you're writing about, one of the things that we did not talk about in the last show was just how many of those unsolved civil rights related murders there were in the 60s,
so
especially down here in the South.
So many. Yeah,
Yeah.
there were really a lot of them, particularly in Mississippi and Louisiana. And I think a lot of that had to do with, because a lot of the law enforcement, particularly it was mostly like centered around just kind of a few towns. And I think a lot of the law enforcement there, were in the KKK. And so they kind of had connections. A lot of the people that were killed that I talked about in this book, particularly like, I think Clarence Triggs and Lewis Allen and people like that. I think a lot of times their killers either might have been cops or might have been cop affiliated, were family members of cops. So, I feel like there was kind of this, again, I don't want to use the word conspiracy, but, a kind of conspiracy to just kind of bump off these particular people they didn't like. It's particularly people that, worked in factories and were kind of, because blacks had their own unions where they were trying to get equal pay, and they were trying to it was like, we don't want to drink out of separate fountains or use separate bathrooms or anything like that, where they worked. So I feel like if their membership in the unions kind of made them a target, so a lot of times they were assassinated. There was particularly one I wrote about in my book, Warless Jackson, I think his name was. He was actually killed by a car bomb, and they think that somebody at his work probably did it, like planted it in his car while it was at the parking lot, and then it blew up on the way home. But because there was a lot of Klan members like working at the same factory as him, and they didn't like it that he had gotten a promotion that they thought should have gone to a white guy.
And there was also another one. I think this was in Detroit. He's actually an author.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, him and his girlfriend got killed. Same kind of thing. I think that might have been more. I don't know if it was necessarily drug related, or because I think that he had a tendency, because he was in and out of prison a lot when he was growing up, and I think that he liked to, once he kind of established his writing career, he liked to use people that he knew from prison, like other criminals, like as characters in his book. And I don't think he was all that circumspect about changing their identities all that much. So I think there might have been a thing where somebody just got mad at him, and when they got out of prison, they just said, well, I'm just going to go take care of that. Or he had problems with heroin addiction also, so that might have also been a factor. But yeah, him and his girlfriend were both killed. Donald Goines, I think his name was, right? Yeah.
Okay.
And Shirley Saylor was the girl.
Yeah.
Do you know him, Sergio?
Yeah, Goines is real well known for like big epic like gangster novels in the 70s, along with he had more like the gangster element to Iceberg Slim, more on the pimping stuff.
Okay. Yeah. You mentioned Iceberg Slim. I think Dave Chappelle talked about Iceberg Slim in one of his stand-up. That's just an aside. Yeah, one of his recent stand-ups. So here's where I want to go with this. Let's talk about the Freeway Phantom. And I want to kind of lead this into these other kind of similar murder sprees, like the Texas Killing Fields, the Highway of Tears.
Yeah.
The Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, the Alphabet murders. All of these are very similar in that it's just a series. It's all little girls or women that are being killed. Yeah.
And it's weird because I feel like a lot of these, I mean, the Freeway Phantom, they're pretty sure that was one guy, but Texas Killing Fields, Santa Rosa Hitchhiker murders, they're not entirely sure how many killers that is. You know what I mean? It's definitely, well, almost definitely not one serial killer. It might be more than one, and they're just kind of happen to use the area as a dumping ground because it's a good area for picking people up, because there's a lot of people hitchhiking or a lot of people that are prostitutes. It's like a area, and then it's like a good kind of a remote area. It has like a lot of things that serial killers like, I guess, like all in one area. So it seems like more than one use it.
Yeah.
But the Freeway Phantom, though, I mean, the MO on these, it was actually 6 murders, and they're pretty sure this was all the same dude because they all seemed very, very similar. And it took place in a pretty short time period. It was like from spring of 1971 through fall of 1972. And the first one of these victims are all like young girls in Washington, D.C., in a kind of a small area. All of the victims were young teenage black girls. They think that the killer was probably also African American, despite one of the victims saying he was white. But so the first victim was actually 13. Her name was Carol Spinks, and this happened a lot too. The victims were almost all abducted while they were just walking to the store. Like, they were just walking a couple blocks to the store, like to get groceries or whatever, and then they would disappear. And that's what happened to Carol Spinks. She just went, it was like afternoon or something like that. She's going to a 7-Eleven to get a couple of groceries for her sister, and she gets kidnapped on the way home. And then they found her body about 6 days later. She was like on the side of a road. She had been raped and strangled. Then there was another one like a month later in July. Her name was Darlenia Jackson, and she was 16. And she was actually going to her job. She worked at a recreation center for the summer. And they actually think there was a witness that reported seeing her in a black car, like an old big black car, and that there was an African-American man driving the car. So that was the last time that she was seen alive. Almost 2 weeks later, they found her body only about 15 feet away from where the first victim had been found, by the side of the road. They couldn't actually tell how she had died because her body was too decomposed, but they did think that it was probably strangulation, but they weren't entirely certain. The creepiest victim, like the creepiest thing that happened with one of the victims, was the next one, and that happened like only a couple weeks later. This girl was named Brenda Crockett, and she was only 10 years old. Again, she went to the store, like her mother asked her to go to the store. It was only a couple blocks away. She disappeared, and then 3 hours later, the phone in the house rings, and it's Brenda. And she says that she is with a white man. She said, "A white man picked me up. I'm coming home in a cab." And then she said something really weird, like, "Did my mother see me?" And her sister had answered the phone. She was like, "Well, how could your mom see you?" It's like, "We don't know where you are." It's like, "We're looking for you." And so then, like, apparently there was like footsteps in the background, and she hung the phone up. And then like a little while later, the phone rings again, and it's her again. Now, this time, Brenda's mom's boyfriend answered the phone and was like, "Where are you?" She's like, "I don't know. I'm in this house, and there's this white guy here. I think I'm in Virginia." And then she says, the boyfriend's like, "Well, let me talk to him." And then she's like, "Bye, I'll see you." And then she hung the phone up. And then a couple hours after that, they found her body just like laying on the side of a parkway. And she had also been raped and strangled. So at this stage, they're thinking, they didn't really think the girl was in Virginia, obviously. And they also didn't think the killer was white. They said they think that the killer probably told her to say that, like, so it would throw the police off the trail. You know what I mean? Because the witness that had seen the second victim said they saw her with a black man. And usually, as I said, serial killers usually, like they say in Silence of the Lambs, serial killers usually hunt within their own ethnic groups. So that's what they were thinking was going on. The next girl was 12, and again, her name was Nina Moshier Yates, again, walking home from a store. In October of 1971, she was also kidnapped, raped, strangled, and she actually was found just a couple hours after she was abducted. And at this stage, they figured this is the same person, and this is when they started calling him the Freeway Phantom, and that's when the name came out in the press. And apparently, once the name came out in the press, much like the Zodiac, the guy decides he's going to roll with it. So the next one that happened in November of 1971, this was like a slightly older girl, Brenda Woodward. She was 18, and she actually she was at her friend's house, and then she was taking a bus home, and then she never came home. And then 6 hours after she was reported missing, they found her body. She had been stabbed and also strangled. They found her like near an access ramp off a highway. And the killer had taken her coat off and kind of put it over her. And in the pocket of the coat, there was this really weird note, and it said, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." And it was in the girl's handwriting. So, I mean, were what looked like the girl's handwriting. So they think that the killer like dictated it to her. And then there was, yeah, right.
Damn.
He didn't want his handwriting analyzed.
Yeah. And then there was one more, and that happened in September of 1972. And this girl was also a high school student. She was 17. She actually had left and she went to her boyfriend's house. And then she was coming home from her boyfriend's house. Her boyfriend put her on the bus. She got on the bus, but she never came home. And then after her parents reported her missing, they found her, again, dumped along a highway. So at this stage, they're like, the only suspects they really have for this, there was actually a gang of rapists, and a bunch of them are in prison, and they called them the Green Vega rapists because they drove around in a green Vega. So there were all of these like rapes and assaults like happening in this particular area. I don't think any of them were ever convicted of murder, but a bunch of them were convicted of, various sexual assaults. So there was a whole bunch of them, and they would drive around doing this. So a bunch of them were in a prison in Virginia, and one of the gang members who was in the Green Vega gang said that that he knew who the Freeway Phantom was, and he identified who it was. But then while the police were investigating it, apparently there was like some kind of election going on. And so the guy that was like running for office came out and said, oh, we think we know who the Freeway Phantom is. We have a suspect. And then the inmate that had fingered the suspect came out and said, I never said that. So that was kind of all they had to go on. And so that sort of went nowhere. But that's kind of something that comes up a lot, that they think that it was maybe one of this Green Vega gang. There were also a couple of cops, or I think they had once been cops. I think their names are Tommy Simmons and Edward Sullivan. And they were actually convicted of murdering a 14-year-old girl named Angela Barnes. So for a while, they thought maybe both of them or one of them was the Freeway Phantom. But after they figured out that Angela Barnes wasn't one of the Freeway Phantom victims, like the MO was different, so they thought maybe it wasn't them. But other than that, like I said, it's probably likely that it's one of this Green Vega gang people, because there was a whole bunch of them, that went around raping people. But that's about as far as they've gotten on that, as far as I know. But yeah, so another kind of relatively unknown serial killer, the Freeway Phantom. You don't hear a lot about him.
No, you don't. And the victims were, I think they were all African-American girls, right?
They were, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, all teenagers.
And the one part that just blew my mind, in that, as you were talking about the Freeway Phantom in the book, was one of the victims, a guy found her like on the side of the interstate or something, kind of like in a ravine or something, or like a creek, and like he calls the cops, and the cops go over there, and like they just drive by. They don't even bother to get out of the car or even check or anything.
Yeah, they just half-assedly looked over there and go, well, I don't see anything. Let's go back to whatever it was I was doing, napping in my squad car.
Yeah.
But so then the guy, so the guy was like, he's like, wow, I never heard about them finding a body or anything like that. So he like I think he told his boss or something, and the boss like called the cops again, and they're like, hey, you guys want to go check that out? And, so finally they go and actually look where the guy said the body was, and they're like, oh, there's a body here. And now it's like super decomposed. So
amazing.
Lost like so much evidence. I'm like, yeah, way to go.
They didn't even care.
Yeah, it's like they really didn't. And a lot of articles I read about that said that because the victims were black girls, maybe the cops really didn't care. Maybe they didn't. It's just kind of like when prostitutes get murdered. It's just kind of like, oh, well, it's like they kind of try to solve it, but not that, not that stringently, I feel like. Maybe that's unfair, but it does kind of seem like
absolutely.
that in a lot of cases, yeah.
The Texas killing fields. Now, is this something that, because I looked at the Wikipedia article about it, is this something that's still going on?
I think, it actually may be, but like I said, the Texas killing fields, I don't think, and I think most investigators that are, kind of, up on this case, I don't think it's one killer. I think it's just a kind of a question of, this is a particularly good area to dump bodies and to pick people up, because like I said, particularly in the 70s, in this late 60s, early 70s, this was an area where a lot of people hitchhiked. There were a lot of people walking. It was kind of remote. There was only like, a couple of highways going through there. So you could like just pick girls up, kill them and dump them. And like people wouldn't find them for years and years. So I feel like it was kind of a perfect storm of, just like I said before, like stuff that serial killers like. There's a lot of victims in the area. There's a good dumping. It's nobody's around. So I kind of feel like this is at least 2, if not more, serial killers. And I don't know if all of them are necessarily related. Some of them, they think they know who did it, but they don't really have the evidence to prove it. I kind of started talking about, because the Texas Killing Fields is such a huge, it's such a huge case, and it involves not only a bunch of murders. They found 30 bodies in there, I believe, at this stage, and countless disappearances, bodies that have never been found. So since it's ongoing, like I'm going to talk about it, the stuff that happened in the 80s and 90s, I'm going to talk about in volume 3 whenever I get around to writing that. So in this volume, I only kind of talked about the girls that disappeared in the 70s. So there were actually, there were enough of those, but like I said, there were more later on. Now, like I said, whether these are all related, I'm not really sure. They said a lot of the victim profile was pretty similar. Like a lot of the girls, they were all aged between 10 and 25 years old. A lot of them had similar hairstyles, or like similar hair color, like similar physical type. So, those might have been the same person. But these were like, the first one that they know of went missing was a 14-year-old girl named Brenda Jones, and she went missing from Galveston, Texas in July of 1971. They found her body the next day. Then there was there were 2 actually, or there was one named Colette Wilson. She was 13. She also went missing in 1971. She was going to band practice or something like that, and her band director like dropped her off at a bus stop like to get a bus, and before the bus came, she got kidnapped, and they didn't find her for 5 months. They found her body 5 months later. Then there was another 14-year-old named Rhonda Johnson. And Sharon Shaw. These 2 actually were together. They were walking down a street in Galveston last time they were seen. They found them like several months later. They were already skeletonized. Then there was a 19-year-old from Houston. Then there was a 12-year-old also from Houston. There were a couple, actually, the next ones that happened were Debbie Ackerman and Maria Johnson. These 2 girls were seen together. They were seen on November 15th, 1971, and they were in the parking lot of an ice cream shop, and they were seen getting into like a van. And then they found them both together like a few days later. They were both dead. And there was also another girl named Kimberly Pitchford. She was also from Houston, and she went missing in January 1973 and was found a couple days later. Now, these 3, they think, were maybe this guy named Edward Harold Bell. And he's in prison now for other murders. But he actually wrote a letter to the police in 1998 and said that he had killed 11 girls, like in the Galveston area. And he couldn't remember all their names. And he couldn't remember like all their descriptions, but they think that he might have killed Debbie Ackerman, Maria Johnson, and maybe Kimberly Pitchford. So those 3 might have been solved. They don't have enough evidence to convict him necessarily. He's in prison for other things. But so a couple of these, they do have people that they think did some of them. So that's why I'm suspecting that this is more than one killer, and probably more like 3. I'm thinking it's at least like 2 or 3 of them. But yeah, there were a bunch of these. And like I said, I talked about all the way up to the girl that disappeared. There was a girl named Georgia Gear and her friend Brooks Bracewell, who was 12, and Georgia Gear was 14. Now, they went missing in 1974, but their bodies weren't found until 1981. So those were the last 2 that I wrote about in this book. And then in the next volume, I'm going to like go on about them because there were a whole bunch more.
Yeah, there's a long list.
Yeah, it's really long.
The Highway of Tears is very similar to this. And yeah,
same kind of thing. And that happened in British Columbia And that is actually, I don't know. I don't think it's still going on. I think the last official quote unquote Highway of Tears murders was in 2006. And the weird thing about those is that they didn't really consider all these as one thing until like the mid 2000s. Like before that, they were kind of thinking, okay, well, there were these 9 victims. Almost all of them indigenous. Like I said, this happened in British Columbia, Canada. There are a lot of actually First Nations, like right around the area, this particular highway or stretch of highway. So it's kind of a poverty-stricken area. It's like a lot of people, there's a lot of prostitution. There's a lot of people hitchhike because there's not really good public transportation in the area and whatnot. So it's kind of it's a kind of a serial killer hunting ground. It's easy to pick up victims. So they had 9 victims that had been killed between 1989, I believe, and 2006. But then when they decided to expand outward a little bit geographically, because at first when they talked about Highway of Tears, they were only talking about Highway 16, this particular 450-mile length of Highway 16. But then they said, oh, well, there's all these other, like all these First Nations groups came forward and said, no, there's like so many more murders and so many more missing girls. You should kind of expand the area a little bit. So then they expanded the area to encompass this 2 other highways. I think it was Highway 97, I want to say. Yeah, 97 and Highway 5. And once they did that, they found 9 more going back all the way back to 1969. So at this point, now all the First Nations kind of advocacy groups are saying we think it's more like 40. Officially, the tally is 18. But there obviously could be more because some of them are just missing and they don't know where they are. I mean, these are just the ones where their bodies were found. But like I said, these are almost all, the large percentage of them were indigenous women. They were usually just out hitchhiking, they'd been out bar hopping or whatever, just doing stuff like, normal young women would do, and they would disappear and then be found many years later, usually raped, strangled, sometimes stabbed. So like I said, this, as far as I know, the last one was 2006 and they're still investigating this. But again, I wrote I think I wrote about 7 of the victims, the ones that took place from like the 60s, to the end of the 70s. So I've got 7 of those in mind. But in the next book, I'm going to talk about some of the later ones. But again, it seems like it's the same kind of thing. I don't think it's the same killer necessarily. It's just kind of an area that for whatever reason attracts serial killers or is attractive to multiple serial killers.
Yeah, I'm looking here at Wikipedia, and there's like a sign, and there probably are several signs that warn girls not to hitchhike.
Yeah,
and they have pictures of the victims.
Signs. Yeah, it's horrible, and it's like it's weird because it seems like in the 60s and 70s, hitchhiking was just it was considered no big thing. I mean, it's just kind of like, and I mean, I grew up in the 70s and the early 80s, and hitchhiking wasn't really a thing. I didn't hitchhike or anything like that, but people you'd walk to school, you'd be out all day outside. It's like your parents didn't know where you were. And I feel like that wasn't a big deal back then. Nowadays, no one would do that. It's like, you know what I mean? It'd be like, they'd be like, you'll get murdered. In a lot of ways, yeah. If the 60s and the 70s are any indication, yeah, you probably would get murdered because an alarming number of cases that I wrote about had to do with girls hitchhiking or just trying to get a ride with somebody or something like that. It's just, so dangerous. And I think they didn't really think of it as being dangerous back then, but it totally is. Of
course, we're all doing it now because you got Uber and Lyft. Like we're all like basically hitchhiking.
That's true.
I'm wondering when the Lyft or Uber serial killer is going to happen.
Well, there was already that one guy in Michigan that shot all those people. He was an Uber driver.
I would never use Uber or Lyft for that very reason.
Really?
But I was by myself.
Yeah, if you had somebody
too many stories. Gosh.
Well,
I don't even like to walk down the street by myself. Like I'll walk around my neighborhood and stuff because it's pretty safe in here, but it's like I won't walk down the street by myself. Hell no.
There are stories like there was one that I heard, and this actually was a female Uber driver. She got this. She had her fare in the car, and the girl was in the car, and she like drove past where she needed to turn down and just kept on driving. And the girl the girl said, well, that was where you need to turn down there. And like the woman didn't respond to her at all. Just kept on driving. Oh, and eventually the girl that was the rider jumped out of the car. It's kind of similar to like that Zodiac case where, the girl and her, the pregnant woman and her little child were in the car. Yeah.
She just jumped the hell out of there.
Well, someone could just drive around in like a busy part of town where all these people are getting picked up Uber and just have like a little Uber sign in the window and people just hop in.
Yeah, I did Uber one time and I picked up the wrong people.
Yes, that's another thing. It's like you don't think about being like an Uber or Lyft passenger, but even being a driver and even like being a delivery driver is super dangerous too, because you're just going to like random people's houses.
Yeah,
he knows all about it.
There was that one, I think in Chicago, where this girl like killed a guy, like stabbed him in the back of the neck. It was like it was an Uber driver. Yeah.
It's like I'm sure it's rare, but it's like just hearing about it. It's like, man, I don't want to leave my house ever.
I wanted to get your thoughts because just about everything that we've talked about tonight has been the violence against women.
Yeah.
And it's just, and a lot of that is in the book. I mean, it's mostly women.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your kind of personal thoughts on that as a woman? And then plus, what the hell's wrong with dudes?
I ask myself that question every single time.
Like it really, like reading this, like really makes you think about just, because I think guys don't understand what it's like. Because there's very little in your two books that's dudes being killed by other dudes. It's always dudes. It's mostly dudes killing women.
It's the thing about it is that dudes get murdered too, obviously. But usually when a dude gets murdered, there's like a specific reason, like they got in a fight or, in an argument, or it was like a drug thing, or, there's like a reason. There was like a jealousy kind of reason. It's like usually if it's just like a random murder, like, hi, I was just walking down the street and somebody walked up and stabbed me like they did to that little girl in New Jersey. Yeah. And, it's almost always a woman. So I kind of feel like you said, I feel like a lot of guys don't really understand. And it's funny because I was talking to Tom about this the other day. We were watching a movie. I think we were watching Terrifier on Netflix. And there was like a scene where the two girls were in the car and this guy came out of the building, like just to smoke a cigarette or something like that. And they were like, look at that creep over there. And Tom was like, is that what you guys think? It's just like every time a dude walks out to like steps out of a building, like to smoke is, look at that creep. And me and my friend Shauna were sitting there and we're like, yeah, that's exactly right. Like, you have to. It's like you have to. You know that guy. You don't know if that dude's going to flip out or anything. I mean, if I'm walking down the street and I see another woman, I don't specifically think, oh, that woman's going to flip out and murder me or anything like that. But, because as a girl, particularly growing up, I mean, starting from when you're 10, 11 years old, you can't really walk down the street without some dude driving past in a car going, nice tits, you know what I mean? So it's like you're always on guard, like all the time when you're outside. Like where I used to work, I would go to the 7-Eleven next door, and it's like I'd just be getting coffee, and I'd like, it's like one day I see some dude and he's like, I like your fingernails. And I was like, oh my God, it's like, get me out of here. It's like, is that, and I was like, now I don't want to go back to my work because then that guy will know where I work and he'll know where my car is. And it's like, what if he's waiting for me when I get off? It's like, and it's just like a constant thing that you have to think of all the time. And like I said, it's probably nothing's going to happen, but the one time that you let your guard down, that's when it's going to happen. So you can't ever let your guard down. And particularly me, because I write about true crime and like crap like this does happen and it's rare. I'm, thankfully, but I don't want to be in that position where just like one time I'd be like, oh, I'm just, overreacting or whatever. And then the dude's like Ted Bundy or something, what I mean? It's like you can't really let your guard down ever. And I do kind of feel like I said, particularly with these kind of just random murders, which is some dude that doesn't even know you and just decides he's going to do something, when dudes get murdered, there's usually, like I said, a reason behind it. Because I did find like a lot of unsolved dude murders, but most of them, they pretty much knew why the guy got killed, Like they were like, he was, a drug dealer, or he had just had an argument with this other dude who probably killed him, or it was like some kind of revenge thing. So I kind of wanted to, I didn't mean for it to like skew, so overwhelmingly toward female victims, but it seemed like most of the male victims, they pretty much knew the motive. If they didn't know exactly who did it, or they couldn't prove who did it, there was a reason. So I kind of wanted to kind of explore more creepier murders. And to me, creepier means random, like just some guy decided he was going to kill somebody and you just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, or, stalker type murders. Because to me, that's creepier. Like if I know the reason, it's not quite as creepy.
And like the serial killers that we know about who were, killing mostly men, there was a sexual component to most of them too. Like
exactly.
Dahmer, yeah, John Wayne Gacy, yeah.
Yeah, and the family murders in Australia, Bevan Spencer, yeah, those were horrifying. And yeah, even though he only got convicted of one of those, they think that he probably had something to do with all the other ones, and those were just like horrific. But like you said, there was a sexual component to those as well. So that's what I mean. There's always some kind of sexual component, even if the victims aren't raped. There's usually some type of sexual component to the crime.
Yeah. Yeah, I was talking to a female friend of mine, and she's telling me about how she tells her daughters, walk with your keys like in your between your fingers, so that if somebody does come up, you can stab them with your keys, at least try to hurt them.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, it's terrible. It's like I remember when I think I was in junior high school, and we actually had a little assembly, and all the girls went into the gym, and there was a cop, and he was like telling girls and we were like 11 maybe, and he was like telling you like self-defense techniques, and that was the key was one of them. And he said, he's like, he would go for the eyes, grab their balls, twist and yank. I still remember twist and yank. He was showing you like where on the neck, like to stab them with keys, like stick them in their ear, stick them in their eyeballs. Yeah. It was. So they were telling like 11-year-old girls this stuff, and I still remember that vividly to this day. It was only girls in the assembly. We thought we were going to go talk about our periods or something, but that wasn't what that was about.
That's good. They didn't do that more often. I think that's a really good idea.
We had that talk too, but
Yeah, I'm just like until like one of us like gets too close to a woman that thinks we're trying to do something, we get twisted and yanked.
Yeah.
I'm not doing anything. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, as guys, just sometimes we really don't have that conception. We really don't understand it until reading something like this, and it's just like, good Lord.
Yeah, I feel like, and I don't want to sound like, you guys don't know our pain or anything like that, but it does seem to be something that guys don't really think about. They can just like wander carefree through the world and like not really worry about anything. Sure. And I really never felt like I had that luxury. Like I always have to be looking around, like, who's that over there? What's that guy doing? Is that guy going to say something? What does that mean? That's weird.
And then you also have to worry about like going to bars and getting your drinks spiked and shit like that. It's just
and I've had that happen
scary.
2 times. I've had that happen 2 times.
Really?
Yes. Yep. That was a fun experience. Luckily, both times I was with people that saved me, that like pulled me out before. And I've also been at parties where I stupidly got really drunk and fell asleep and things like that. So, and you really shouldn't do that type of thing, because if something bad happened, then of course it'd be all your fault. But you know what I mean? But luckily the one time that happened, nothing bad happened. Because again, I had a friend there that was like, hey, I'm going to lock her in here so nobody does anything. You know what I mean? But you always have to have that. You always have to have somebody have your back, because you can't relax ever. You have to be ever vigilant.
That's scary. It really is. Well, Jenny, thank you so much for doing this second part. Tell people where they can get the book and all your other wonderful books and your podcast.
Well, the easiest thing to do would be to go to Amazon, that little site, and just put in my name, Jenny Ashford, and all my books will come up. I swear that I am actually working on the audiobook version of Faceless Villain Volume 2. It's just taking way, way longer than I thought because, like I said, technical issues that always spring up every time I do one of these. But, the first volume's out in audiobook and the second volume is out in print and ebook and all that. And like I said, all my books are on Amazon, very easy to find. And if you want to listen to our podcast, it's called the 13 O'Clock Podcast. And it's on YouTube, so you can search it on YouTube. We also have, we opened up a new channel on BitChute a little while ago. Not all the episodes are on there, but, most, I think the last 20 or so are up there. And, you can also listen. It's on iTunes and stuff like that if you just want the audio version. The video version is more fun, I think, but I do an audio version as well that's on iTunes and all the other podcast places.
Yes, with Mr. Tom.
With Mr. Tom.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to add, I think you would really be good at selling a house to a serial killer because you'd tell them about the neighborhood. It's great. It's got high prostitution, places to dump bodies.
Right? It's very high fences. No one will see what you're doing. You can bury all these bodies in your yard and no one will know anything.
All right, Jenny, stay on the line for us. We're going to close this section out, and guys, we'll be back. Close out the show on Conspirinormal.
The end of the world. The Battle of Armageddon. Horror of nuclear war. The day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise. The elements shall melt with fervent heat. The earth and the works that are therein shall be burned. Fire, smoke, and pillars of smoke. The elements shall melt. The elements shall melt.
Okay, well, we just had a marathon.
Yeah.
Because we did the about hour and a half with Jenny, and then we got on, I think, for another 30, 40 minutes, and we got Tom, and we did another Patreon-only episode with them.
Yes, sir.
So that should be up around the time that this episode is up for our Patreons. And we got into UFOs,
yeah,
Hellraiser, Dune, and the election in Brazil. So we'll get to hear Tom's viewpoint on the election in Brazil because he lived down there for a number of years, and I just wanted to get his thoughts on it. Do you have any thoughts on all this stuff that's going on right now? With we had this, I don't want to dwell too much on it, but the shooting at Pittsburgh and
oh yeah, we
this
have
whole bomb thing, and I don't know, of course this is going to post in a week, so who knows what else is going to happen. We got some bad shit that's been happening in the last couple of weeks.
I think I wasn't really expecting it, but I think people really didn't think Trump was just going to keep doubling down like he has. It's not going to stop, as far as he's not going to try to be the voice of reason, or really distance himself from things, or come out and say that, look, everyone, we need to chill out, and no matter how, if that many people getting murdered like that won't change it, then it's gonna keep happening. There's been a lot of talk, and of course the guy who shot the synagogue wasn't a Trumper, but a lot of these extremists and white nationalist racists,
they see Trump as a useful tool and as kind of like a front to get people politicized and then take them further into their extreme.
So do you think that he emboldens them?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you think that he knows that he emboldens them, or do you think he just says whatever he wants to say and that's it?
I don't see how he couldn't know that. I mean, I think he's pretty blind in a lot of ways, but how can you not? I don't know. It's weird.
How could you not know it? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's been a weird week.
Well, and now he's saying that he wants to do an executive order to revoke naturalized citizens. And
which I don't know that's going to fly or not.
Yeah, it won't. I mean, all this is really
that's
about,
the 14th Amendment, man.
Yeah, and all this is really about these are the tests of our republic, of the system.
Yeah.
This is what it's supposed to be designed for. So, and I'm not just picking on a Republican, but it's sad that the people who were concerned about these executive overreach issues during the Obama years are now, very silent about Trump, of course. But it usually goes both ways like that. So whatever, same old bullshit.
Right. If it's our guy, then it's okay. If it's not, then it's not okay. And that's the part of the problem, is that people think that when, I mean, the investment of the executive branch with a great deal of power hasn't been going on for a long time. And each administration has set the groundwork for the next. They've inched a little bit here, a little bit there, and then the next one comes in and picks it up. So they there's a lot of complaints about Obama and what he did. And, I remember guys like Dinesh D'Souza really getting on to Obama, talking about he had overstepped a lot of his power in the Constitution when, Bush had done it, Clinton had done it as well. But then they were okay once all that apparatus and all that precedence got handed over to Donald Trump.
Yeah, which is the reason why no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, you should not want anybody to build on this executive overreach, because then the people you don't like are going to use it. It's just,
And we're in danger of the possibility of the legislative branch just becoming a blank check.
Yeah.
In some ways, it already is.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going to happen with this election. I'm not, I went out, I voted today, and, I'm not confident. I'm honestly not confident that Democrats are going to take the House. I don't think they're going to take Congress. I don't think it's going to be the blue wave that everybody says it's going to be. And I'm also not confident that the Democrats are going to do anything to help anybody. I think it's just going to be, if they just get back in power, it'll be just their business as usual. They're only concerned about themselves and their party, just like the Republicans are concerned about themselves and their party. And then meanwhile, everybody else in the middle is just kind of just stuck.
Yeah.
We're stuck in the same situation. Nothing is really have our lives honestly changed in any real way because Trump is president or because Obama is president, Has it changed? No. Situation hasn't changed. Which is why I still believe in, doing things on a local level. But it just hasn't changed. And so there's been so many things like this, the bombs that went out to all these Democratic people that didn't go off, and all this suspicion that that's a false flag, which now, you've got half of the country that thinks that it was a false flag the Democrats did themselves, and half of the country that thinks that it wasn't. And like, you're not going to be able to change anybody's mind either way on either of those sides. And so the polarization continues. It doesn't matter or not whether it was a false flag or he actually did it, because the people that believe it are just going to believe what they're told on the media.
Well, I don't understand how. I mean, I guess I do understand, but I think there's a real lack of self-consciousness going on in the right now, because it's so on fire. And they're gonna, if that is your political agenda, then, and you want to advance it, then you're gonna have to help rein in some of these crazies, because it's gonna be bad for your agenda. You can't just, it's terrible for, if this was happening on the other side. Could you imagine the kind of damage control that the Democratic Party would be, trying to do if there was any kind of, real like left-wing potential terrorism, domestic stuff? I mean, they would.
Yeah.
And it's really just not a concern to them, I feel like, to the right wing. It's not even like they don't have to.
No, because they're winning.
Yeah. But it's really kind of blowing my mind. I don't know,
yeah. I mean, they're in power and they're winning, and they don't care. I mean, there's people that don't see that their words are gonna have some kind of consequence, and you're gonna get some true believer that's gonna go out and do what the guy in Pittsburgh did. Okay, he doesn't like Trump, but he's still obviously an anti-Semite to do what he did. And he did it because he felt that the Jews were behind the whole caravan thing.
Right.
Because you've got this Jewish organization that is a Jewish charity that has been around since the 19th century that helps out refugees. Mm-hmm. And he believes, okay, well, the Jews are behind it, so I'm going to go just kill some random ones in my own hometown.
And he's part of all these online communities.
But man, you got so much craziness on the left, too. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, but it's not, no one's doing this yet. And I'm not saying it won't eventually start happening.
Just wait, because I honestly think that, like, if they lose this election, and especially if they lose again to Trump gets reelected in 2020, they're going to go ape shit.
We'll see, man. It's bad. All around bad. We had all this murder in the first part of the show.
Yeah, it's a real good one. It's really
feel good.
It's really edifying. Well, okay, but if you would like to hear more, keep us afloat, and you would like to hear some extra interviews, you can go to www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal and hook us up. Help us get back to $100, guys, because apparently we lost $3 more. So I'm hoping that, the show pays for itself, but I'd like to do more and actually pay Serfiel and Rob. That might be nice for them.
We're going to go on strike.
I don't really want to have to sell mattresses, guys. Mattresses are razors, which apparently is really popular among podcasters these days to advertise. I don't want to have to sit here and say, I really love this mattress I got that folds out into the shape.
Feel free to send us samples, though. I mean,
yeah, if you want to send us a mattress, go right ahead. So next time, Aaron Gullius is coming back on, and we're going to talk about his book on conspiracies. And looking really forward to this one as well. So I think that's it, Serfiel, unless you got anything else you want to add.
No.
All right. And we will be Robless again next week, but I'm sure that he will be back at some point to man the show. So join us next time, guys, on Conspirinormal.